Hi, everybody. Come on in. Welcome. We'll just give everybody a chance to get their Zooms going. As you know, we are going to discuss KLUTE today, or this evening. I hope you all had a chance to watch Lisa's thoughtful introduction. Many of you know, you're familiar with from past discussions, Lisa DeNight is joining us, so we appreciate that. Thank you very much, Lisa. For those of you who might not be familiar or might need a reminder, the best way to let us know you have a question or comment is to use the raise hand option in Zoom. The slide on the screen gives you an idea of how to do that. You can talk to each other and make other comments in chat if you like. We have a colleague who is watching the chat, but in terms of questions, please use raise hand and I will call on you. And if you're not actively asking a question or making a comment, we ask that you please keep your computer muted so we can hear the people who are talking, and we will go from there. So I would encourage everybody who has a question or comment right off the bat to please let us know by raising their hand. And until we get a couple of those showing up, we did get a few questions or comments online, and one of them I think is one that is kind of a pretty common thing that is said about the film, or a pretty common remark made about the film, which is the movie is clearly about Bree Daniels, the character played by Jane Fonda. Why is the movie called KLUTE? And I know, Lisa, you have a couple of interesting thoughts on this, so why don't you share those for us to start off?
Sure. Hello, everyone. So I have a couple answers to this question, which is a very commonly posed question, as Andrew indicated. Practically, I think it has a lot to do with the fact that this was a project in evolution. You know, it was a screenplay that initially had a lot more focus on KLUTE as the center focus of the film. And then as Jane Fonda came on and Pakula started collaborating with her, they really kind of took away a lot of that emphasis on KLUTE and put it more on Bree. So I think just the nature of how the project unfolded, and then this title just kind of stuck along for the ride, is maybe the actual answer. But I do have more of a subjective take on how I kind of see this title very accurately representing the contents of the film. And that is, you know, if you look at the title as a totem of what's most important or who's the most important character, maybe it doesn't work because KLUTE clearly is not the central character. But KLUTE is the central emotional conflict of the film for Bree. KLUTE happens to Bree. KLUTE comes into Bree's life and upends it, emotionally speaking, and certainly within the realm of what's going on in her life. It hinders and helps at the same time. So if you think about the title indicating the central conflict of the film for Bree, I think KLUTE is a very effective title. And also, Andrew and I were discussing this, it just sounds good. It's a strong, single syllable, weighty KLUTE. Like, it's just a good title, I think. Those are some of my thoughts on the title, Andrew.
Yeah, a lot of people will say that K words are good for comedy, but I think they just work in general, as you say, strong sounding. So there's always that practical, and it's kind of a bit mysterious too. You know, if you're scrolling past that, either on a marquee or in HBO Max or wherever, you will sort of say, "Huh, what's that?" So there is that. It looks like we have a few questions starting to pop up. Faiza, did you have a question or comment? I see you unmuted. And then you remuted. No. Yes. Liza.
I can't hear anyone.
We can hear you. We hear you. Go ahead, Fiza.
Okay, you can hear me?
Yes.
Oh, great, wonderful. First of all, hello. It's so
Hi.
nice to see you, and Lisa as well. What an interesting film. I was just going to say off the bat, just think about how much more cool KLUTE is. KLUTE. I mean, it just, that sound effect of KLUTE, cool and mysterious. This was a film where, because of a number of things that Lisa mentioned in her brief introduction, the editing, the cutting, the music, the eeriness, it didn't let us get too close to Bree. We could get so close and not closer. So what a great way to put a wall between us and her. It's obvious that she's the central character, but this is a degree of separation between us and her. And I believe that that KLUTE was the string that sort of attached all the events from one to the other. So he sort of was the connector between the dark world and the not so dark world, between law and lawlessness and all of that. And most of all, I just think KLUTE is a very cool, it's a very cool name. I wanted to watch it after I heard that. Whereas Bree Daniels, it just kind of sounds like she could be your aunt, and she was far from anybody's aunt.
No, you make a good point. Thank you for that comment. I think something you said really sort of jumped out at me. One of which is the sort of suggestion you made about distance. That for a film that shows this character in so many intimate moments and so many private moments, and heck, we spend a good amount of time in the film in therapy with her, there is a sense in which we, as you say, we only get so close. In fact, if you think about the way the scenes of her therapy are shot, we see her on screen in sort of single shots, but most of them aren't particular close-ups. They're closer to medium shots. And we're always sort of reminded that she's in that office. And I think that is, I think the notion that there's a barrier or some sort of, distance is a really interesting one. Lisa, did Fiza's comments make you think of anything?
Yeah, I mean, I see barriers and conflicts and distancing in pretty much every single element of this film. So I love that connection that you make with the title as well, another barrier between us and Bree. I mean, and I'm sure we're going to talk about the cinematography more, but every single shot, there's just stuff in front of you. There's no clear view hardly ever in this film. And so I really appreciate that comment about the title. Thank you, Fiza.
Okay, Charles, do you have a question or comment?
Yes, hi, Andrew.
Hi.
This film reminded me a lot of The Parallax View, and it turns out they're both done by Alan J. Pakula. Whatever happened to him?
Okay. Well, Alan J. Pakula, I'm not sure who's saying it right, but I've always said Pakula, but that doesn't make me right. That's just how I've chosen to say it. He had a really long career. This film was only his second film as a director. He started out as a producer. He was the producer of choice, I guess you would say, for director Robert Mulligan, who was best known for To Kill a Mockingbird. And Pakula actually produced that pretty early in his career and was nominated for an Oscar for it because the film was nominated for Best Picture. And after working with Mulligan for about 8 years or so, he struck out as a director and was pretty much involved as a producer director on most, if not all, of his movies, which is not something that directors typically did much at that time in film history, and not at the beginning of their careers. But because he'd worked so long as a producer separately, he was actually able to do it, and actually rather good at it. A lot of times, some of you may have heard me say this before, the producer-director relationship is sort of like the coach-general manager relationship, that it takes an exceptional sort of brain to do both of those jobs well and have the discipline for one side to tell the other side yes or no on certain things. And the same is true with producer director. A lot of producers try to direct films and they usually don't have the artistic touch for it. A lot of directors try to be producers and often they don't have the sort of, business touch for it. But Pakula did. So this is his second film. The first one was The Sterile Cuckoo with Liza Minnelli. And then after this, as Lisa mentioned in her introduction, he did The Parallax View and All the President's Men. And then he had a pretty solid career moving forward. Not anything that consistently matched the run of those three films, but he made Sophie's Choice and was nominated for an Oscar for that screenplay. He made Presumed Innocent, The Pelican Brief. So he made some other thrillers. Presumed Innocent is definitely an exceptional movie, but he had some hits and misses, but overall a pretty good career. And unfortunately it was cut short. He died in a car accident when he was 70 years old. He probably would have made a number of more films, and I think we missed out on that. But that's the basic trajectory of his career, and I think he really had a knack, particularly for sort of thrillers and taut situations and characters under pressure, which served him very well in this film. I just said far too much. Lisa, do you have anything to add, or should we move back to KLUTE?
I'll just very briefly say I'm very glad that The Parallax View is a known quantity for you. I hope it is for many other people if you haven't already seen it. And yeah, the three of them together in this, so-called paranoia trilogy, KLUTE, The Parallax View, and All the President's Men, build on each other and speak to each other in such tremendous ways. You could probably isolate any shot of any of these three movies and know immediately who the players involved are: Pakula, Gordon Willis, etc. Go ahead, Andrew.
So Sue, I see you have a question or comment.
Yes, I have one comment. I thought it definitely was a 70s movie in terms of the costumes, and I love the hair and all of that. But my question really was regarding Jane Fonda. Where was she on her acting career when she landed this part?
That's a good question. Lisa, do you want to take this one?
Sure. Jane Fonda had many films already in under her belt by this point, but this film comes at such an interesting point in her cinematic career, as well as her activist career and her own personal self-awakening. She was most well known up to this point, I'd say in the late 60s, early 70s, for pretty light, sexy, comedic fare, or just almost sexploitation in a way, if I can say Barbarella is sexploitation. So she had this kind of, I don't want to say faux Brigitte Bardot look, but she was very well known at that point for these light comic roles: Cat Ballou, Barefoot in the Park, and then Barbarella, which really transformed her image. And then towards the end of the 60s, she really was looking for more meatier parts as her own personal activism was kind of being ignited at that point. And she landed this amazing role of Gloria in They Shoot Horses, Don't They?, which is a tremendously depressing movie that's set in the Great Depression. And that really kind of set the table for some career trajectory pivot that then went on to include this role, KLUTE. She really took on this trajectory of picking roles that stood for something that she believed in. So KLUTE came at a very pivotal time in her cinematic career, as well as her evolution as a person.
And she actually wanted to drop out of the film after, I'm not sure if it's during production or during pre-production. She worked with Pakula, and as Lisa was saying, she was very interested in the part because of what it represented as a depiction of a woman in a Hollywood film and this particular sort of character in a Hollywood film. And that sort of struck a chord with her, but she didn't think she had the sort of, chops or fortitude to play this sort of character at some point after she had signed on. In fact, she specifically said to Pakula, fire me and hire Faye Dunaway. And Pakula said, no, I think we're going to stick with you. And, she gave him, during the award season, but also I think throughout her career, it's even mentioned in her autobiography, I believe, which is pretty recent, that she gives him tremendous credit for that, because he stuck with her when she herself didn't think he should. And it turned out, I think, very well for the film, obviously, but also well for her career too. So that's a good development. Let's see. Joss, you have a question or comment?
Yeah, well, one or the other. Back to the title and the character of John KLUTE. It may be an oversimplification, but I wonder if he didn't serve as sort of our surrogate for some of this. I mean, he was a character that is, I would think, more familiar to us in our own lives, way more than the Bree Daniels character is. And we could have, I think he's functioned as a way of us seeing her as an observer, being an observer. I think it's oversimplifying it, but I think that may have been a function of his character.
No, I think you're right. I think that's a good point. That was, I think, certainly part of the way the film was constructed. And while I don't know that necessarily in and of itself would make that him being the title character make sense, I think that combined with the changes Lisa alluded to helped sort of, fill in that picture. Ed, do you have a question or comment?
Yes, thank you. I thought that it was, the title doesn't bother me because he's essentially the catalyst for the action, and everything revolves around his investigation and how he interacts with Jane Fonda's character. So that didn't bother me at all. I kind of thought it did make sense. Maybe in a lesser, not your initial first choice, but it did make sense to me. But I wanted to ask Lisa, you said in the little video we watched previous to this starting, that you thought in the trilogy, in Pakula's trilogy of films with Parallax View, KLUTE, and All the President's Men, that you liked this one best. And that's what I wanted to ask you about, because just give you my take on it. I always thought All the President's Men was certainly the most exceptional out of the three of them. I did see Parallax View, admittedly a long time ago. It did not impress me as much as the other two. But KLUTE, as a great character study and fascinating, great performance by Jane Fonda. But I didn't think there was much suspense there. There's not a lot of plot turns. You kind of figure out maybe midway through that Chiaffi's the bad guy. So it's just a question of when Donald Sutherland's character was going to catch him. But what happens was, like I said, other than the music being terrific and Gordon Willis's cinematography helping with the suspense, not a lot of plot twists that were unexpected. So I'm curious as to your take as to why you preferred this over All the President's Men.
That's a great question. And I will say, if I am being completely honest with everyone here, in the Parallax View, that 6-minute sequence where Warren Beatty's character is experiencing a certain video sequence, I will not ruin it for anyone that hasn't seen it. That is probably, that 6-minute segment set aside, is probably my favorite thing of the entire 70s cinematic canon. But KLUTE as a whole is still my favorite of the three. And it really, I guess, it just depends on what you are looking for in a film. If you're looking for KLUTE to deliver the goods in terms of taut suspense thriller with lots of twists and turns in the narrative, then it probably will disappoint you, even though I think it is still a very strong suspense movie, or at least it slips into its suspense set pieces very well. It is my favorite because Jane Fonda's performance is probably my favorite female performance of all time. It is just the most real and honest depiction of a woman who wants to be an object of desire, who wants to have control over her desirability, but fights against or chafes against the patriarchal culture that only values her as such. So I consider KLUTE my favorite for Jane Fonda's excellent, like life-changing performance. That is essentially what, of course, there's all this excellent score and wonderful cinematography to elevate it, but definitely Jane Fonda's performance as a truthful, fraught depiction of a woman trying to find herself in today's society.
Can I follow up with a little bit about her character as well?
Please be brief. Please be brief, Ed.
Okay. All right. It seemed to me initially her character was kind of a independent, liberated woman, but when she got into trouble, she immediately turned to KLUTE to help her. So I wanted you to speak to that too, because I thought it was going in a great direction. Her character is terrific, her performance is terrific, but I thought that was a bit of a cop-out from the standpoint of her being a liberated woman, and I wanted you to address that.
Well, I will address it by saying that Bree is extremely lonely, and she has eked out this existence that is more or less untroubled, except for the occasional awful letter or phone call. But then KLUTE kind of comes into her life and changes it up, and you know, because she doesn't really have a support system, but KLUTE is interested in helping her, you know, rid herself of these bad elements that come into her private life. It makes sense to me that she would work with him and be drawn to him to try to help him help her, essentially. That being said, I think the protector theme for KLUTE is constantly undercut in this movie. Like, yes, she does turn to him, and yes, he does act as a protector, but the film finds many interesting ways to undercut that and be very ambivalent about KLUTE's long-term ability to support and protect her, and Bree's interest in that. I think that the end is just the perfect ambiguous note to close this you know, protected relationship on, because she's clearly not sure it's going to be the be-all end-all for her.
And I would just add two things. One, of the three films that were in the trilogy, this is the one that by far pays the most attention to character, to the development of an individual character and her sensibility, worldview, beliefs, troubles, etc. The other two are far more plot driven, and in a way the characters they're crusading reporters, and that's basically sort of what we need to know about them. Many, you know, some reviews at the time, and I think those of a number of comments that people have said to me or sent in over email have indicated that, you know, this is far more of a character study, sort of wrapped in the clothing or the wrapping of a thriller, than it is a thriller itself, because it's hard to argue with the points that Ed made, that you know who does it, pretty early on, and the plot isn't the thing here, the characters are. And I think that I think you said it very well, Lisa, that she, you know, she sort of refuses and delays and puts off and undermines KLUTE's sort of saving of her or helping of her in many ways, in many instances. I think it's a much more complicated relationship and dynamic than the sort of that's eventually the man just comes and saves the woman. I don't think it boils down to that at all. Let's see, Dana, you have a question or comment?
Hi guys.
Hi.
This is one of my dream movies, and I'm with you, Lisa. This is one of the best performances of all time, maybe the best female performance of all time. So I kind of want to go a little further with where you already are, and just mention that I remember when I saw this in the 70s, and I was of the time. And then when I saw it recently, I've seen it through the years, and I'm 50 years past the time. I think the performance only gets burnished in time. One of the things that I noticed this time watching it that I'll share, and please comment, is the character is just so magnificently developed, and there's so many wonderful choices that Jane Fonda makes, and I could take up the rest of the time and share them, but I don't want to, nor do you want me to. But what I see happening here is she is so of the 70s. She is so of the time when women were beginning to realize that they had choices. And to make a movie interesting, you couldn't make a movie about a secretary or a teacher, because those were the professions that were really available to women, and you succeed. But you could make one about a call girl. And one of the things that happens in this movie is we get to watch a great call girl, a woman who is really, really great at what she does, but she's troubled about what she does. She's not sure whether she wants to stick with what she does, and then thrown into it. And here's where I'm so in line with what you're saying. Along comes KLUTE, and this magnificently formed character goes awry because we learn that while she's a great character, she's a very unformed woman. And a couple of things that happen, she doesn't know what to do about KLUTE. She goes back to Roy Scheider, to her pimp at one point. She runs back to him. And then, of course, there's that incredible moment when she goes after him with the scissors, which horrifies her because she figures, I need to exterminate this guy. I'm falling in love with this guy. So I just find it to be so interesting. Oh, my goodness. Can you hear me? Okay. Because in the 70s, we women were making choices. And while in a million years, I wouldn't want to identify with a call girl, I have to say that women making choices and women trying to decide about profession versus a guy. The fact is, it was so interesting at the time. And that she didn't wind up with him in the end, I don't think is another thing that made it of the 70s and very interesting. And that's it for me. But thanks.
Thanks, Dana. I don't feel the need to add anything. Lisa?
Thanks, Dana. That was such a great comment you gave. I agree with everything you said, and I think that one of the reasons this has such holding power, 50 years later, is that even today, women often make or have to consider making a significant amount of sacrifice if they enter into a traditional male-female relationship. And I think, while this film does an excellent job at making it specifically to Bree Daniels and her struggles, her life milieu, I think there is an element of universality that is just going to be as relevant 100 years from now as it was in 1971 as it is today as well. So thank you for your comments.
Matthew, do you have a question or comment?
Hello. Sorry, it's a whole family here, but I have a question. I was wondering if you could speak to the narrative style of the film. You touched on this a little bit, but sometimes it feels like the cinematography really outshines kind of the suspense of what's actually happening. And so I was wondering if you could speak to that and its significance and how it kind of plays to the strengths of the film.
Okay, I have some thoughts on that. Lisa, do you want to start?
Please go ahead, Andrew.
Okay. I think Lisa mentioned this in her introduction, and the great cinematographer Conrad Hall, who did won an Oscar for American Beauty and shot Cool Hand Luke and just a bunch of wonderful movies in the 60s, 70s, and all the way till the, into the 2000s. Was a peer of Gordon Willis and identified him as the Prince of Darkness because Willis was far more adventurous and bolder in his willingness to use darkness and include darkness in films at a time when that was still something that was frowned upon, particularly when it wasn't sort of directly justified by genre, film noir, or setting, or time of day, or things like that. And I think what you see in Willis's cinematography that helps with the character elements of the film is something we alluded to earlier, which is the sense of distance, the sense of barriers, the sense of framing things in such a way and at such a scale, at a distance or perceived distance, that includes just the right amount of the set and setting and background and props in it to underscore Bree's uneasiness visually, right? And if you think about, and that uneasiness takes a number of different sort of shapes. I think about the beginning of the film, which is probably the brightest part of the film, when she's in that waiting room and for the modeling job, and she's in the row of chairs, and the way that that's framed, it's framed brightly. It's framed beautifully. You have the enormous, art portraits, the photographs on the walls. You have all these beautiful people and this beautiful clothing. That being said, the choice in how that's framed is to make something that is bright and shiny and new and stylish and beautiful on some level seem unappealing. And the way that happens is by framing it just so there's almost an assembly line look or a mechanized look to the individuals sitting in the chairs and the sort of the assessors walking by. And so that sense of uneasiness that we have is sort of conveyed to us not through the close-up of an uneasy character, which is what we would expect, but through the sort of almost uncomfortable way, something that should be visually appealing and not at all uncomfortable by making it uncomfortable. And I think you see that in other moments. I think the distance, the objects, cluttering up the textile shop where the sort of climax of the film happens, the sort of hodgepodge, not design or props, but structure and shape of Bree's apartment that, so many sort of nooks and crannies for someone to be hiding and to be watching. And we see those. I think that Willis actually, in a film that doesn't have a lot of the sort of scary, tense moments you think of as a thriller, I think he puts the thrills in the compositions. And I think that's what helps with that element of the storytelling. Anything you want to add, Lisa? I know I talked enough for 5 people. I'm sorry.
It was great. You question asker, you asked about the narrative structure, and whenever I watch a Pakula film, the parallax view is I think all 3 of this paranoia trilogy, any one of these 3 films kind of has the same issue where the rhythm of the narrative is very unconventional, to put it nicely. It's weird. That there will be a scene that maybe should last, you feel like it should last for 2 minutes, but then it lasts for 20, or there's just this uncertainty of how long in each narrative parcel you're going to spend. And I love that about these films. And when you talked about narrative structure, I'm immediately pulled back to the very beginning of the film, where you're just in this suburban nest of conviviality and family and everything is as it should be, even though the very first shot of the film introduces the recording device, and so nothing is as it should be. And the extreme economy, the like brutal economy of indicating that Gruneman, is this pleasant family man, ostensibly, and then he's gone, like in just the most quick cuts. He's gone and it's dark and something is wrong, and immediately setting you up to be in the suburbs. Like you're never again in the suburbs, even though the suburbs hang over this film so dramatically. I just love the weirdness of a Pakula narrative structure, and he himself has said that that was kind of typical of his style. He admitted in interviews that he has an elliptical style. His cinematic texture is withholding. He admitted he likes to give the audience some elements that are immediately understandable and clear, but then withhold others, really to kind of open up this space for the viewer to contemplate and muse and really kind of probe narrative structure in the first place. So that's all I have to add to that.
Okay. Let's see. Luann, you have a question or comment?
All right. Hi.
Hi.
Hi, Andrew. Hi, Lisa. Thank you so much for showing this movie. This is really one of my all-time favorite movies. I think Jane Fonda's performance is amazing. And I love having seen this movie many times and then hearing this discussion about it and being able to consider so many things that I really didn't consider before. A couple things. One is that I just wanted to say that I understand that although we know sort of who the bad guy is, I still think there's suspense here because we don't know exactly how everything's going to go down. So I think there's still a great deal of suspense, and I really enjoy that. Jane Fonda's performance, yes, is amazing. And finally, I just want to say I'm going to be that person here, and I'm going to say there have been conversations between me and other people about the end of the movie and whether Jane Fonda goes off by herself, whether Bree goes off by herself, or whether she goes off with KLUTE. And I'm wondering if you could comment on that.
I mean, I think she goes off with KLUTE. I think she's very unsure. I think she's tentative about it. I think she doesn't have a tremendous amount of faith in the durability of that relationship. But I think that she's sort of at the point where she realizes she's tried it other ways for years, and she's going to try it this way in a new place and see what happens. But Lisa, that you're far more familiar with the film. So what's your take?
My take is that she is absolutely leaving the city. And whether or not that means she's going back to Cabottville with Mr. KLUTE, yes, I do subjectively think that she is going with him. I do not think it's going to last. I do not think that the life experience is complementary in this relationship. That is my take. I know for certain that she's leaving the city temporarily. She has to get out of the city. Her wonderful, adorable apartment is cleaned out, which to me, the end is sad. Like it's ambiguous and it's sad because, well, on one hand, the good thing is that it's clear Bree is going to continue working on herself through therapy. Like she's going to continue trying to find who she is and what she wants and what's important to her through therapy. But seeing her place cleaned out, even though that apartment it's so porous, like it's invaded, dark and cluttered, but it's hers, and to see her apartment cleaned out always leaves me a little sad. But I do think that she's going with KLUTE, whether or not she stays more than a week, as she indicated in her overall narration. I hesitate to say that continues.
Okay, let's see. James, do you have a question or comment?
Yes, thank you. I did have one comment I wanted to make about that sort of closing scene, which I find it really hard to focus on it, because I used to work backstage in theatre, and they always said never get someone to leave with an empty suitcase, and the suitcase in that scene was definitely empty. You could see by the way it was sort of moving around, which was distracting. But my point I was going to sort of say is, I think, or a question really, is that the relationship between KLUTE and Bree, although it's a really useful catalyst, as I think Joss mentioned earlier, to get the action going, it felt to me that it was just, there was nothing to it. That when they got together and the sort of scenes they had together were really sort of flat, I think, compared to the scenes when Bree was on her own. And do you think that was kind of intentional, or perhaps that's not the way everyone else views it? I don't know.
Lisa, do you have thoughts on that?
I do think the film consciously is baking into the narrative some tension in this relationship. I think, well, if I can take a step back, I think KLUTE purposefully plays a sort of blank, withdrawn person in this role, just like Charles Cioffi plays kind of a weak, thinly drawn villain. I think there's a reason for that, and perhaps we can touch on that later. But I think that KLUTE and Bree are drawn together through this shared trauma, and the need to solve both of their problems for the same goal. And there are some moments of real tenderness. The scene where they're shopping at the night market is one of the most lyrical and romantic scenes in the entire film. I think she's had the full gamut of men. She probably knows the type just like John KLUTE. I'm not saying that there's anything unique about John KLUTE, but he's nice, and I'm sure his squareness is kind of appealing in a way. In this moment, at least, probably not long term. But I do think that there is built into the film a tension about whether this relationship is between two people in love. Like, I don't think John KLUTE loves Bree. I don't think this is a deep romantic love. I think it's a very real relationship of people that are drawn together in this really tense time where there's physical danger and uncertainty, and kind of bonding over that in some way. So hopefully that was somewhat helpful.
Jessica, you have a question or comment?
Hi.
Hi.
Can you hear me? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So there were just a couple bullet points I wanted to add that I thought were really interesting. I guess one of the first things that really struck me about the film was the introduction of Bree. So the first thing that you see is the little tiny audio recording, which I'm assuming in 1971 that was really cutting edge technology to have a recorder that small. And so you hear this really confident voice. You have no idea what she looks like, but she's very assured and all attention's on her. And it seems like every word she speaks is just exactly what she means to say. And then it cuts from that until that image of in the Whitney. I was trying to figure out what artist did those beautiful triptychs, but I love that you have this beautiful, huge image of like mechanized beauty, where you have this like classically beautiful face, but also it looks obscured by metal, almost to the point where it's not quite human. And then you have this whole row of women just being looked at, and they seem disembodied from their voices. So I thought that was a really interesting contrast. And I think Bree didn't seem that particularly self-assured in that moment when she is one of these faceless people, or not faceless, voiceless women. And the other shot that I really liked in this was there's one going from KLUTE's basement apartment showing this tape recording machine. And then it goes for this really strange angle from the bottom, this very old style elevator. And I just thought it was a really good juxtaposition of this very new technology, I'm assuming, and then this very old technology of this elevator, but also from a very odd angle, which I've never seen an elevator from that angle. And it just kind of really gives you that feeling of this uneasiness that something's going to happen or go wrong, or someone's watching from this angle. So I think what was really interesting is not so much who done it as much as how does it get accomplished? And I think the how is what makes it really interesting. And then the other 2 points was I really like the soundtrack. It kind of reminded me, it came later, but of Suspiria, has this kind of echoey, ghostly soundtrack to it. And I felt like there was a little bit of similarity there that I enjoyed. And then the last part about the ambiguous ending, I do think it's clear she's leaving the city in that moment. But one thing that was interesting is when she's talking to her therapist, she goes, oh, I don't know, I'll be back next week. But then when KLUTE can hear her and she picks up the phone, she's like, oh, I'm leaving New York immediately. So it's interesting when KLUTE wasn't there, how she framed it versus when he was there. So those were a couple little bullet points I had on the film. And I don't know if anyone had any comments to that.
I would say those are great observations. And I particularly like your point about the juxtaposition of the elevator and the tape recorder. I think part of the reason you've never seen a shot like that before is, like me, you've never seen an elevator with kind of an open top you can see through. So I think that was part of it, but good on them for incorporating that. And that is a very clever edit that you pointed out. So thank you for doing that. Let's see, Evan, did you have a question or comment?
I do. Thanks for doing this discussion. It's been wonderful. I have a lot to say about this movie. I've been typing in the chat, so I won't talk about my feelings about the ending or Pakula's strangely withholding narrative style, but I want to focus in on that that scene of the prowler on the roof, because when I saw this on TV as a young kid, it was so dark and it was so strange and so disorienting. I figured that it must have been edited for television. There must have been something left out, or the pan and scan was leaving information out. But I don't know another Hollywood movie that has an extended sequence like that where you absolutely cannot tell what's going on. It is pitch black. And I just wondered if Andrew or Lisa had any ideas about other similarly disorienting scenes in movies from that time, because it seems like they gave Gordon Willis free rein to just go as far as he wanted to go there. And there's not a shadow in some of those cuts.
I think actually there's a lot of disorienting 1970s cinematography. And I think you see some of it in parallax view, not disorienting so much for darkness, but because you don't know what you're seeing all the time. And sometimes it takes a long time for that to become apparent. And frankly, I think given its, sort of A-list prestige kind of pedigree and the fact that it is meant to be a far more mainstream movie, I think there's disorienting footage in All the President's Men. And so not necessarily because of darkness, but some with Deep Throat in the parking garage and other shots at night. So I'm having trouble thinking of a specific moment in a specific movie now, but it struck me as entirely characteristic for the era and the general genre of the film. Lisa.
I love that scene that you indicated, Evan. It is scary. Like, there are some really scary parts in this film. Like, for how much we've talked about, sometimes the suspense elements aren't super strong. That set piece is scary. And anyone who doesn't think so has veins of ice. But I think the darkness in that sequence and the disorienting nature is really purposeful to fit this thematic connection that I briefly alluded to in a different response, where KLUTE and Cable are purposefully kind of underplayed characters, even though I think both do have great characterization. They sort of represent two different archetypes or two different paths in Bree's life. There's the threat, there's the opportunity, and I mean that's just boiling it down to oversimplification. But I do think the two of them, because they're so strongly identified throughout the film together, with the same surveillance apparatus, the same following nature. But in that scene, you almost lose track of who's chasing whom. Like we see Cable in actually the first time that we realize that Cable's the guy, he's the bad guy. We see him in this very long shot that's just illuminated by the flashlight that KLUTE is carrying around, and you have no idea where they are. They're just kind of in this other dimension where one may be chasing the other, and it's so thematic in that darkness. It's so thematically resonant because if you think of them as archetypes in Bree's life, one could so easily become the other. And I love that scene for its absolute disorientation and deep thematic reach, I think.
Let's see, Diane, do you have a question or comment?
Yeah, I was going to get back to the character of Bree. I mean, it seemed to me that she was dealing with a sex addiction, and that she was unable to really break away from the pimp or break away from the life. I mean, part of it was, I think, that she liked the control that she felt that she had when she was with these men. But on the other hand, she also realized that there was that this pimp was not going to be good for her either. But so the introduction of the psychiatrist, I thought, was interesting. In fact, I was wondering how many 1970 films really had a psychiatrist. But one more point about that was that whenever we saw the psychiatrist, it seemed as though she was looking over her shoulder at Bree. She was never looking directly. Was there something about that?
Your one question you asked was how many 70s movies have psychiatrists, and I would just mention that Woody Allen made a lot of movies in the 1970s, so there's at least probably a half dozen there. And I think that you're right. I think that we are, I understand what you mean about the way the psychiatrist was sort of looking at her. I think that we're meant to think that that's a function of her trying to take notes, and also trying to draw a clear visual and physical distinction between these two women, and that she is far more of an upright and proper sort of person, and that Bree is having trouble connecting in many realms of her life, and unfortunately it would seem she is having more trouble connecting, might be having more trouble connecting with this therapist than she might with somebody else. The other thing I would mention is those scenes are to a large extent, Fonda's dialogue in those scenes are to a large extent improvised, based on her understanding of the character and her sort of study she did in preparation of the film for the character. And I think part of the reason her performance is so appreciated and praised is because those moments, I'm not going to go so far as to say those moments are real, because I don't think it's fair to say Jane Fonda's talking about herself, but she's talking about her understanding of the character of Bree in a very sort of authentic sense. And I think that's part of the reason why those scenes are so impactful. Lisa.
I cannot speak for Jane Fonda, but I do wonder if she was, in some respects, talking a little bit about herself in some of those improvised scenes, because she was having an affair with Donald Sutherland at this point. So perhaps she was talking about Mr. Sutherland in some of these improvised settings. But I love these therapy sessions in the film, because The film, I think it plays with a lot of narrative conventions, but it also follows them in some respects. But these therapy sessions are entirely set apart from any genre or flavor or style. They're just subjective spaces where Bree is talking to a woman, a therapist, about her issues, about her problems and trying to better herself. And it's amazing. We get such a deep insight into Bree's psyche, but the film never over analyzes her or tries to explain her. We don't have a moment where, there's the backstory of why she's hooking. It's just such a special space in this movie to allow Bree to have this intelligent conversation with a therapist, to try to get deeper into herself. And I love one of the comments earlier from Jessica was about the end where KLUTE is in her presence, and she says one thing, but clearly in this other space with her therapist where it's clear it's devoid of genre, it's devoid of any other cinematic trapping than this woman talking to another woman. That's really where I think she's most herself and most honest with herself. Certainly, if I'm not an expert on second wave feminism, but therapy and psychoanalysis was becoming a big part of feminism in the early 70s. So I think this movie is kind of nodding to that directly, but at the same time making it very unique to this film.
Gary, do you have a question or comment?
Hi, yeah, this is Gary's daughter. We're all here.
Hi.
So we actually watched this film like maybe about 3 or 4 months ago, and I remember the scene that really confused me was when she was at the club and she seemed kind of zonked out. And I wanted to know how you guys interpreted that scene, because I didn't really know what to make of it. And yeah, I'm just curious.
I assume you're talking about the scene where she sort of seems to go back to Roy Scheider.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that she's overwhelmed and she's confused, and we know throughout the film that her reactions to certain things in her life are not always the most productive or safest for her. And I think this is another instance of that sort of behavior that, I don't think it's fair to say that, she's a prostitute, so she's self-destructive. She has other reasons for doing that, and she makes those clear. But I do think that this is after she sort of, the threat against her has become more crystallized. This is after, I can't remember if it's after one or two of her friends have kind of either overdosed or are, imminently going to overdose. And I think that she's scared. She feels alone. She feels more distant from KLUTE than she does at most of the points in the film after they get to know each other initially. And I think that, that's sort of the shelter she goes to in the storm. Lisa.
That scene comes after. So to take a step back, she's established she's trying to get out of this. Like she keeps getting drawn back in for various reasons, often to do with her rejection in quote unquote legitimate work. But this moment comes after KLUTE she's agreed to go with KLUTE to go deeper and deeper down like every single level of this horrible ladder, where she's trying to find Arlen Page, the now junkie, as she's referred to, and so she starts out at the high class brothel and then takes a step down to the lower class brothel, and then when she finally sees Arlen in that scene where they're waiting to barter some radio with a guy that's going to give them some drugs. Her face in that scene is so revealing. I mean, it's a stone face, but because she's Jane Fonda, you can see so much emotion and pain and deep discomfort in that moment. And then the scene immediately after, she's in the car with KLUTE and she jumps out and she goes somewhere to quell that pain. So I think that's the emotional trajectory that leads her to that scene.
I mean, in many ways, that's her bottom, of at least within the film. I think there's I think people talk about the film and the plot being known and who the killer is and all that, but one thing that isn't known, I think, and that is really a question at that moment is she going to come up from that bottom? And so, I think there's that type of, I don't think suspense is the right word, but uncertainty, at least about that element of the story. Faiza, did you have another question or comment? Or did I just not lower your hand from before? I guess I didn't lower your hand from before. Roseanne, did you have a question or comment?
Yeah, I do. Actually, I have a couple of comments. I think that disorienting shots are because, you find out pretty early in the movie that KLUTE is watching Bree, before he reveals himself. And then we find out that somebody's watching KLUTE. And so the disorientation for me came from, I'm watching somebody watching KLUTE while KLUTE watches Bree. And that is disorienting. So that's one comment. And the cinematographer made me feel that. Good for him. And the second comment I wanted to make was about Bree's character. I don't think, I disagree with Lisa in the romantic scenes or even sweet scenes. I don't think Bree knew how to be real. She looked really uncomfortable with KLUTE in that market. She didn't know how to be real. And she says this to her therapist. She does the job she does because she likes the acting, the control. She uses the word acting. So in her life, she's not real ever. She's only acting. So she doesn't know how to be real with KLUTE. That I had another comment, but I forgot it. So there you are.
Well, thanks, Roseanne. No, I mean, I think you do see in that scene that I think both things are true, actually. I think your point about that being, the scene where they're at the market, I think it is one of the most sort of, lyrical and romantic scenes, certainly it's the most in the film and one of the more in general across many films. But part of the reason that is the case is because you see her uncertainty and you see her hesitation, and we know that she doesn't hesitate when she's working. We know that she knows how to appear to be interested in or taken with a man. And the fact that she has some genuine feelings or wants to express some genuine warmth or affection is the reason she's so tentative, because she doesn't know how to do that. She's very much out of practice in doing that. Lisa, did you have any thoughts? You
said it perfectly, and frankly, that's why the scene is so meaningful to me, because she looks uncomfortable. I mean, it's just an interesting collection of little ticks. Like she steals an apple and kind of puts it in her bag and looks at a father and son, and she's constantly like looking around. And then when she kind of grabs the back of KLUTE's jacket when they walk away, Andrew said it perfectly. Like she knows how to project her performance perfectly in many scenarios. But when we see her truly uncertain and slightly uncomfortable, but in a pleasant way, I guess, it really speaks volumes about how she is for maybe the first time, making some potential space in a vulnerable part of her for this man. That's my read on it, at least.
Okay, and Faiza, you are back. Did you have another comment or question?
Yes, I wanted to say, first of all, Fonda's performance was extraordinary. I think one of the best of a female actresses I've seen. I think she really embodied the character in every way she possibly could. I think this was a very unconventional movie story style of presentation in a way that Il Conformista made me uncomfortable and sitting on the edge. This movie did. For instance, why did a call girl even have a therapist? And back in the 70s, and why did she sound so sophisticated and knowing and self-aware? But that didn't detract from the story that was being told, which was, among other things, how would she overcome whom she had been to have a fuller, richer, not just relationship, but life. And at the end, in one of her comments to the therapist, she said, I just don't know how to do that, because the only way I could survive being a call girl was to detach myself, and being with KLUTE entails attaching myself or making myself available or vulnerable. And one of the refrains that Fonda kept saying is that it's all about having to let go. You have to let go. And she at the end could never do that. I don't know if you recall that line, and I forget the 2 or 3 instances when it appeared. And I didn't think at the end that she was gonna go with KLUTE. The large, cold, empty cavity of that apartment left me feeling that she was just gonna go from a diminished life to an even emptier life, because she was leaving something she knew for she doesn't know what, because she did at one point say, like, what am I gonna do now? Go to the suburbs and do X, Y, Z. So it seemed like she was gonna fall on even a greater, sadly, greater disconnection and loneliness, because she just didn't know anything about being in an intimate, close relationship with a man.
Yeah, I think those are good observations. Rochelle, did you have a question or comment?
No, I'm sorry. Just listening.
Okay. Well, I think we're going to leave it there. I want to thank Lisa very much for joining us, and all of you for joining us and for your continued participation. Before we go, I have a few announcements. One is that we are often, I saw that we were being asked, people missed some of the discussion. Can they get a recording of it? All of our film discussions, from the ones we started doing back in March, are available in the Film Studies Online archive, which you can find in the education section of brynmarfilm.org. Actually, you can find it in the Theater 5 section at brynmarfilm.org. In addition, each week's discussion is available about 24 hours after it takes place. So tonight's will be available tomorrow night, but they all live in the Film Studies Online archive, and you can find the instructors' introductions there as well. In addition, we have a couple of classes coming up. Tomorrow night is the first of 4 sessions on the language of film. You can sign up and register for that. That is a course with a fee. Also, tomorrow afternoon, we have the first of a series we have coming up, film history lectures. The one tomorrow afternoon at 3 o'clock is about the origins of cinema and how it was invented and how it sort of emerged from the culture of the Industrial Revolution. You can find more about those on at brynmarfilm.org in the Film Studies Online section and in Theater 5. In addition, we have other things. We have new films that you can stream. We have other film-related types of word games and puzzles and other video segments, and there's a lot going on. So please check out Theater 5 at brynmarfilm.org and Film Studies Online at brynmarfilm.org. And we appreciate your participation and look forward to seeing you at a future discussion. Thanks so much, everybody. Take care.
Bye.